Welcome to Cryptid Monologues. Let's dive into a world where myths meet imagination. Here we unravel chilling tales of cryptids, Bigfoot, Wendigos, Dogmans, skinwalkers, and more. These stories are crafted to ignite your imagination. These stories are purely fictitious, and names and/or events are purely coincidental. If you like these kind of stories, please give a like and subscribe. Click on the notification bell to stay up to date. Thanks for listening. Let's get into it. Part 2: Signs of Change. The first few days in the new camp passed uneventfully. The men set new traps along the riverbank and fleshed the remaining hides. Etienne began to relax, allowing himself to believe they had left the Dogman behind. But small signs hinted that the mountains were not done with them. One morning they found a trap sprung but empty. The ground around it churned and clawed. Another day, Tahoe discovered a single footprint larger than any wolf's. He said nothing to Etienne, but his silence spoke volumes. One evening, as they prepared to sleep, the distant sound of howling echoed through the valley. It was faint, almost indistinct, but enough to send a chill down Etienne's spine. "We keep the fire high tonight," Tahoe said, his voice firm. They did, and though nothing approached the camp, neither man slept well. As the days wore on, Etienne began to question their plan. The new camp was better suited to survival, but the looming sense of danger persisted. He debated whether to continue trapping or cut their losses and head back to the trading post with what they had. "Tahoe," Etienne said one morning as they prepared their gear, "if we leave now, we could make it to Fort Carlton before the first snow." Tahoe studied him for a moment, then looked to the mountains. "We've done well here, but the land is restless. It would be wise to leave before it turns against us." Their bond, forged in shared trials, made the decision easier. The men agreed to finish tending their traps and prepare for the long journey back to civilization. With the decision made to leave the mountains, Etienne and Tahoe worked swiftly to dismantle their camp. Each passing hour felt heavier, as if the wilderness itself resisted their departure. The claw marks on the tree were a fresh warning, but Etienne forced himself to focus on the task at hand, bundling the pelts, packing the provisions, and preparing their weapons. By midday they set off. The path to Fort Carlton was a daunting trek of over 100 miles, through icy rivers, thick forests, and treacherous ridges. Despite the challenges, the thought of the fort's sturdy walls and bustling hearths drove them forward. For days they moved steadily, checking their traps along the way and collecting what pelts they could. The forest seemed quieter than before. Too quiet. The usual calls of birds and rustling of small animals were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence that gnawed at their nerves. On the 5th day of their journey, Etienne noticed tracks in the snow. They were large, canine, but wrong. The toes were too long, the claws too pronounced. He crouched, studying the prints with growing dread. "It's following us," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Tahoe nodded, his expression grim. "It doesn't want us to leave," the night stalker. That night they camped in a small clearing near a frozen stream. The fire crackled brightly, but the light felt feeble against the oppressive darkness of the forest. Both men kept their weapons close, their nerves taut. The first howl came just after midnight. Low, mournful, and bone-chilling, it echoed through the trees. Etienne and Tahoe exchanged a glance, their fears unspoken but mutual. Then came the rustling, soft at first, like the wind brushing against leaves, but growing louder. Something was moving just beyond the firelight, circling the camp. Etienne gripped his musket, his palms slick with sweat. A branch snapped, and both men whipped toward the sound. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, glowing eyes appeared in the darkness. 2 amber orbs that reflected the firelight like molten gold. The Dogman stepped into view, its massive frame illuminated by the flickering flames. Its fur was thick and dark, its lupine face twisted in a snarl that revealed sharp, glistening fangs. It moved with a predatory grace, its claws digging into the frozen earth. Tahoe raised his bow, aiming for the creature's chest. "Not yet," Etienne whispered, his voice trembling. "Let it come closer." The beast tilted its head, watching them with unnerving intelligence. Then, with a guttural growl, it lunged. The battle. The dogman stood motionless for a moment, its amber eyes fixed on Etienne and Tahoe. Its low growl reverberated through the clearing, a guttural warning that sent chills up their spines. The firelight flickered across its fur, casting monstrous shadows on the surrounding trees. Etienne's pulse thundered in his ears as he slowly drew the long hunting knife from his belt. Tahoe gripped his bow, the tension of the drawn string vibrating faintly in the tense air. Neither man dared to move. The dogman took a step forward, its claws sinking into the frozen ground with a sickening crunch. The beast's breath came in heavy, visible puffs in the cold air, and its ears flicked toward every sound, its senses razor-sharp. "Tahoe," Etienne whispered, his voice trembling. "The fire. Scatter the embers." Tahoe gave a small nod and, with a sudden motion, kicked at the fire pit, sending a shower of glowing embers into the air. Sparks flew like fireflies, momentarily startling the creature. It recoiled, its head snapping back and forth to track the sudden explosion of light. "Run!" Etienne shouted, but neither man turned their back on the beast. Instead, they edged toward the boulders at the far side of the clearing, their steps deliberate and slow. The dogman recovered quickly, its snarl deepening as it advanced again, this time more cautiously. It seemed to savor their fear, taking its time as it stalked them. Etienne felt his grip tighten on the knife until his knuckles ached. Without warning, the dogman darted forward with terrifying speed, leaping to block their path. It landed mere feet away, its massive frame blotting out the firelight. Etienne's instincts screamed at him to run, but he stood his ground, holding the knife in front of him like a feeble talisman. Tahoe acted first. With a sharp cry, he shot an arrow, not at the beast, but at a low-hanging branch above it. The arrow struck true, and the snow-laden branch crashed down, momentarily pinning the creature beneath its weight. "Now!" Tahoe shouted, grabbing Etienne's arm. They bolted for the rocks, scrambling over the jagged terrain as the dogman thrashed behind them, splintering the branch like it was kindling. A deadly chase. The beast's enraged roar shook the forest as it tore free, its claws gouging deep furrows into the earth. Etienne and Tahoe climbed higher, their hands and knees scraping against the cold, sharp stone. The dogman gave chase, its powerful limbs propelling it up the rocks with ease. Etienne turned, his breathing ragged, and hurled a stone with all his might. The projectile struck the beast's flank, but it only seemed to anger it further. It lunged, swiping at Tahoe, who barely avoided the blow by ducking behind a jutting boulder. "We can't outrun it," Etienne gasped, the bitter truth settling over him like the mountain's cold air. Tahoe's eyes darted to the narrow ledge above them. "There! If we make it up, it won't have room to follow." The two men scrambled upward, the rocks slick with frost. The dogman bounded after them, its claws scraping against the stone as it closed the distance. Etienne reached the ledge first, pulling himself up with trembling arms. He turned to help Tahoe, who was struggling to gain footing on the icy surface. "Faster!" Etienne urged, his voice cracking. The dogman lunged, its jaws snapping inches from Tahoe's leg. With a desperate cry, Tahoe swung his bow, striking the beast across its snout. The dogman reeled back, momentarily stunned, and Etienne seized the chance to grab Tahoe's arm, hauling him onto the ledge. But the reprieve was short-lived. The dogman crouched, its muscles coiling as it prepared to leap. Etienne and Tahoe scrambled along the ledge, the narrow path forcing them to press against the cold stone wall. Below, the ground dropped into a sheer ravine, the rushing sound of a hidden river echoing faintly from the depths. The dogman's leap brought it onto the ledge behind them, its claws gouging deep into the rock as it steadied itself. The beast advanced slowly, its snarls reverberating off the cliff face. Tahoe suddenly stopped and turned, his face resolute. "Etienne, keep moving." "No," Etienne said firmly. "We fight together." The final stand, Etienne handed Tahoe his musket, now reloaded, and gripped his knife tightly. The men faced the Dogman as it crept closer, its amber eyes blazing with malice. "Tahoe," Etienne said quietly. "When it lunges, aim for the throat." Tahoe nodded, the musket steady in his hands. The Dogman crouched low, its growl building to a deafening roar. Then it sprang, a blur of fur and claws. Etienne dived to the side, slashing upward as the beast sailed past him. The knife bit into its side, drawing a stream of dark blood. Tahoe fired, the musket's boom echoing across the mountains. The bullet struck the Dogman's neck, and it stumbled, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. But it didn't fall. The creature lashed out wildly, its claws slicing through the air. Etienne and Tahoe ducked and weaved, their every movement fueled by raw desperation. Finally, Etienne spotted their chance, a jagged outcrop of rock jutting above the ledge. "Tahoe, the rocks! We can bring it down!" Tahoe understood immediately. He darted past the Dogman, drawing its attention, while Etienne scrambled up the outcrop. The Dogman snarled and lunged at Tahoe, who dodged nimbly, leading the beast directly beneath the precarious rocks. Etienne heaved with all his strength, dislodging the largest boulder. The stone plummeted, striking the Dogman squarely on its back. The beast let out a final, agonized roar before collapsing, its massive body sliding over the edge of the cliff and into the ravine below. Etienne and Tahoe stood in silence, their breaths ragged. The sound of the rushing river far below carried away the tension of the fight. "It's gone," Etienne said, though the words felt hollow. "For now," Tahoe replied grimly. Neither man moved for several minutes, their bodies too exhausted and their minds too shaken to process the encounter. Finally, they began their descent, their focus on reaching Fort Carleton before nightfall, and before the wilderness could exact its revenge once more. Arrival at Fort Carleton. The sight of Fort Carleton's sturdy wooden palisades rising from the snowy horizon brought a surge of relief to Etienne and Tahoe. The journey had been grueling, marked by relentless cold, harrowing terrain, and the shadow of the Dogman's terror. Yet here was sanctuary, a beacon of human presence amidst the untamed wilderness. As they approached the gates, Etienne raised a weary hand in greeting. The sentry stationed atop the wall recognized him and called down, "Rousseau, you've made it back!" The heavy gates creaked open, and the warmth of the fort's bustling activity enveloped them. Traders, trappers, and laborers moved about, their faces ruddy from the cold but alive with camaraderie. Etienne felt a pang of longing for normalcy as he and Tahoe stepped inside. The fort commander, a grizzled man named Captain McAllister, greeted them in the main hall. His sharp eyes took in their haggard appearances and the fresh scars that marked Etienne's arm. "You've been through hell, I see," McAllister said, gesturing for them to sit by the roaring hearth. "Tell me everything." Over steaming bowls of stew, Etienne recounted their journey, the wolves, the ancient cliff paintings, and finally, the Dogman. Tahoe added his perspective, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. McAllister listened intently, his face grave. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "You're not the first to speak of such a creature," he said. "I've heard whispers from other trappers and the natives, but most dismiss it as legend." Etienne shook his head. "It's no legend, sir. We fought it. We saw its strength, its cunning. It's real." McAllister nodded slowly. "Then we'll need to take precautions. If this Dogman roams the mountains, it poses a threat to everyone venturing west." Rest and recovery. The following days brought much-needed rest. Etienne and Tahoe were given quarters, warm blankets, and hearty meals to help them recover. Tahoe, though quiet by nature, became a source of fascination for the fort's residents. His skill in crafting arrows and his knowledge of the land earned him respect, while his calm demeanor made him a welcome presence. Etienne spent time repairing his gear, his hands steady despite the lingering tremor of recent events. Yet, even in the safety of the fort, the memory of the Dogman haunted him. At night, he dreamed of glowing eyes and guttural growls, waking with a start to the comforting hum of the fort's activity, a warning shared. The fort's residents were intrigued by Etienne's tale, and whispers of the Dogman spread quickly. Some dismissed it as superstition, while others looked to the mountains with newfound caution. One evening, Etienne gathered with a small group of trappers around the fire. He shared the journal he had found in the abandoned cabin, its pages worn but its warnings vivid. The men read in silence, their faces shadowed by the flickering flames. "This land has its own rules," one of the older trappers said finally, his voice heavy with experience. "And its own guardians." Tahoe nodded. "The Dogman is no mere animal. It's tied to the spirit of the wilderness, a warning to those who take more than they give." Moving forward, Etienne knew his journey was far from over. Though the fort offered safety, it was a temporary reprieve. The mountains still called to him, their peaks shrouded in mystery and danger. Yet, he would not face them unprepared. With McAllister's support, Etienne began planning his next expedition. He traded stories with other trappers, learning from their experiences, and stocked up on better equipment. Tahoe, now his trusted companion, agreed to join him, their bond forged in the crucible of survival. As Etienne stood on the fort's ramparts, gazing westward, he felt a mixture of trepidation and resolve. The Rockies held both fortune and peril, and the Dogman was only one of its many secrets. But Etienne Rousseau was a trapper, a survivor, and a seeker of the unknown. The wilderness had tested him, but it had not broken him, and as long as there were new trails to blaze, he would answer the call of the Rockies. The grizzly's fury. The new camp sat nestled in a quiet glade, surrounded by towering pines and the steady murmur of a nearby creek. Etienne and Tahoe had chosen the spot for its relative shelter and the abundance of animal tracks in the snow, promising fruitful trapping. The two men worked efficiently to set up camp, pitching a sturdy tent and securing their supplies. The air was crisp and cold, with the fading sun casting long shadows across the forest. As they prepared their evening meal over a crackling fire, the tension of the Dogman encounter began to ease. The stillness of the woods offered a deceptive sense of calm. That calm was shattered by a low, guttural growl that sent a chill down their spines. Tahoe froze, his hand halfway to his knife. Etienne turned toward the sound, his heart thudding as he caught sight of movement in the trees. A massive grizzly bear lumbered into view, its bulk immense and its eyes locked on the camp. Its fur was a patchwork of scars, and its breath steamed in the icy air. This was no curious animal. It was a predator asserting dominance over its territory. "Don't move," Tahoe whispered, his voice barely audible. He slowly reached for his bow. Etienne's hand tightened on his musket, his pulse racing. The bear growled again, louder this time, stepping closer. The firelight danced on its shaggy fur, illuminating the sheer power of the creature. "Slowly back away," Tahoe instructed, his voice steady despite the danger. "Do not run." They began to retreat, step by agonizing step, but the bear had already decided to assert its dominance. With a deafening roar, it charged. The fight for survival. Etienne raised his musket, aiming for the charging beast. The crack of the gunshot echoed through the glade, the ball striking the bear's shoulder. It let out a furious roar, but did not stop. The musket fell from Etienne's hands as he scrambled for his hunting knife. Tahoe loosed an arrow, the shaft sinking deep into the grizzly's flank. The bear snarled in pain, swinging its massive paw and sending a nearby log flying. Its sheer ferocity was overwhelming, a primal force of nature intent on destruction. The bear lunged at Etienne, who dived to the side just in time, the claws raking through the air where he had stood. Tahoe shouted, drawing the beast's attention. Another arrow flew, this time striking the bear's neck. The grizzly turned, charging at Tahoe with terrifying speed. Tahoe darted behind a tree, the bear slamming into the trunk with a force that shook the ground. Splinters flew as the massive animal reared up on its hind legs, towering over both men. Etienne, seizing the moment, grabbed a burning log from the fire and hurled it at the bear. The flames licked at its fur, and the beast roared in fury, swiping at the glowing ember. The distraction bought them a few precious seconds. "To the creek!" Tahoe yelled, grabbing Etienne's arm. They sprinted toward the sound of rushing water, the bear thundering after them. Branches snapped and snow sprayed as they ran, adrenaline fueling their desperate escape. Reaching the creek, Tahoe and Etienne turned to face the beast. The bear barreled out of the trees, its eyes wild with rage. Etienne grabbed a large rock from the creek bed, gripping it tightly as Tahoe knocked another arrow. The grizzly hesitated for a moment, sniffing the air. Blood dripped from its wounds, but its strength remained undiminished. It charged again, and Tahoe loosed his arrow. The shaft struck true, piercing the bear's chest. Etienne hurled the rock with all his strength, striking the bear's head. The impact stunned it, causing it to falter. Tahoe seized the opportunity, plunging his knife into the creature's side. The grizzly let out a final, ear-splitting roar before collapsing into the snow. Its massive body heaved once, then lay still. The silence that followed was deafening. Etienne and Tahoe stood motionless, their breaths ragged, staring at the fallen beast. Blood stained the snow, and the acrid smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. Tahoe knelt by the bear, murmuring a prayer of respect for the animal's spirit. Etienne, his hands trembling, retrieved his musket and began reloading it, his mind racing. "That was no ordinary bear," Tahoe said finally, his voice heavy. "It had survived many battles. It was a guardian of this place." Etienne nodded, his throat too dry to speak. The fight had left him drained, but also profoundly aware of the fragile balance of life in the wilderness. The two men worked in silence to salvage what they could from the bear. Its pelt and meat would sustain them, but the memory of the encounter would haunt their nights for many winters to come. Thanks so much from Cryptid Monologues for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. And hey, while you're here, check out these videos. You'll definitely love them. See you in the next one.